is the Executive Director from Asia Center. We will discuss the report today of our new study about hate speech in Southeast Asia. And before we will move on, we will have a video now that we want to play. Back. Welcome back. So before we start, just some logistical details. We're just waiting now for the slides to be pulled up. Perfect. So some logistical details on the webinar. So first of all, to reduce disruption and ensure our internet stability, we would kindly like to ask you to mute your microphones and also to turn off your camera. This really to ensure the internet stability. So our team is also doing that, so don't be surprised if that is happening for you. Also, we have our Zoom chat box. If you have questions throughout the webinar, you can pose your questions there. So any questions related to the report or related to the guests that will join us today, you can include them in the Zoom chat box. Also, we will include our updates there in terms of like upcoming events and social media topics. So then on social media, we have two important requests there. So first of all, please like and check into the Asia Center Facebook page. And we have our live stream also now, our Facebook live stream live. And you can also share this live stream with your own network. So these are two important social media actions from our side. Good. Then this event is co-convened with the Thai Media Fund. It's a joint project from us, and it includes two webinars that we have organized in May and in June. You can still rewatch these on our Asia Center YouTube page. Also, of course, this webinar is part of that, and we have our international conference on hate speech in Asia, the 7th until the 9th of October. So that is also still coming. This conference is co-convened with the law faculty of Thammasat University and the Friedrich Naumann Foundation and the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. We currently have 11 panel partners that are participating in our conference. So there's still a chance also there to register to be a panel partner and also to sign up for the event. Good. So before we move on to the agenda, we would like to post a poll that you can participate in. And that's going live now. You'll see this on your screen. So the question is on hate speech in your country, if it has been spiking recently. So feel free to answer that. And while you are doing that, I will discuss the agenda with you. First of all, we will discuss, of course, the report of our new study on hate speech in Southeast Asia. This will be done by Robin. And after that, we will have a discussion with guests that are joining us in this webinar. First of all, this is Nurjudi Binti Abdullah from Brunei. She is the founder and executive director from Project Women and Girls Development. Then we have Rowan Reed, who is the Asian Programs Manager for Internews, with an extensive background in journalism and specifically related to human rights in several countries in Asia. So, and then we have Nukila Evanti, who's a close friend of the Asia Center and also the executive director of the Women's Working Group from Indonesia. And then we have another guest who's joining us, that is Gayatri Kandadai from the Association of Progressive Communication. This NGO is currently working on a very similar project based on of our study on hate speech, but it's in South Asia. So there are a lot of parallels there that she will talk about during her presentation. And then lastly, we have our own Dr. James Gomez, the regional director, who will also give his comments on the report, of course. Yeah, and obviously we will have a Q&A session with you. So again, if there are any questions that you have, you can include them in the Zoom chat box, and then we will discuss them. So we really welcome that to have questions from the audience. Then let's go to the poll results.
Right now we have 15.
Do we have the poll results? Yes, we do. Yes, so we have an 88% yes answer on the question: has hate speech been spiking in your country recently? Very interesting. That's of course the majority, and this is exactly what we will discuss today in the presentation. That's what we will talk about. So I think this is a nice bridge to Robin to discuss the report.
Very good. Thank you, Belen, and welcome to everyone who has joined us. Welcome especially to our speakers. Thank you all for being here. You can see before you, so we are pleased to present the Hate Speech in Southeast Asia, New Forms, Old Rules, our latest report, this time on hate speech in Southeast Asia. You have the contents of the report before you. Following introductory and background sections, the main things, key points that I will touch upon in this presentation are the forms of hate speech, the legal measures, the policies and practices, the role, the place of the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, what's happening in the region, the role of technology companies, and probably most importantly for today, what are the recommendations that we offer? So we see, first of all, broadly, we have seen 4 forms of hate speech across Southeast Asia. Hate speech related to race and religion, hate speech related to foreign nationals, migrant workers, and refugees, against political ideologies and values, hate speech related to that, and also vis-a-vis sexual minorities, LGBTI community, women. Now, in relation to both of those, LGBTI and women, it's useful to note that there has been some, let's say, evidence of harassment for sure. On the other hand, for organized campaigns, hate speech campaigns related to gender, that requires further examination, further evidence gathering. So here, I think one key point to note is that hate speech related to race and religion has been a constant, and the attempts to control it have been a constant in the post-independence nation-building enterprises of the various countries. The other 3 are the newer forms, and it is these forms that have to be accommodated, legislated, and so on. So if we move on to the legal measures, you can see before you 3 types of legal measures. One is harmony bills and a commission that have been attempted, set up in the last few years. So you see on the right there, harmony laws and one commission. The commission in Malaysia proposed in 2020 a law, the Protection Against Hate Speech Bill in Myanmar, dated 2016. In the Philippines, we have a House bill, a Hate Speech Act, that was filed at least in 2019. And you see in Singapore, they have revised, updated the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Bill. So other than Singapore, in the other cases, this is still a work in progress. The second type of legal measures is, well, as you see, existing laws. And these include penal codes, in some cases, which include anti-blasphemy provisions, for example. It includes the Computer Crime Act, for example, here in Thailand. The Electronic Information and Transactions Law in Indonesia, for example, and other such laws related to electronic information and transactions in some other countries in the region. COVID-19 laws are the latest set of laws that have been added. These three comprise the legal regime to combat hate speech. So COVID-19 laws address fake news, and that has a bearing on speech, potentially hate speech against vulnerable migrant communities, migrant workers, refugees, and so on. So these are the legal measures. Now for the policy measures, policies and practices, our report has examined policies and practices in relation to 6 areas, which I will enumerate in a second. The main point here is that collectively across these areas, reviews have to be done across these areas with a view to eliminating discriminatory policies and practices. Such policies and practices that have a negative effect do impact ultimately also on freedom of expression. So you see the 6 policy and practice areas: government agencies and mechanisms, ethnic and racial policies, guidelines for religious practices, language policy for indigenous community, policies against the LGBTI community, and integration activities, bringing people together to forge better relations. All of those have to be revisited, reviewed, as I suggested earlier. If we turn next to the International Convention for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the ICERD, which is a fairly, as you all know, a fairly important treaty. It has been adopted by 8 countries, and 3 have yet to become signatories. So this is these 3 are, let's say, the missing link to this legal regime. So governments, although one of the problems is that governments, although they have in the region, although they have signed it and adhered to it, they are not reporting properly. And some of their policies and practices may sometimes lead to counterproductive results. Malaysia recently tried, as I think some of us know, Malaysia recently went through a process of signing up to the ICERD, but for various reasons, certain forces in the country decided that it was not the right time to do so. So next we have the role of technology companies. And here at this point, I want to flag for your attention that these tech companies in particular have responded late, but they are nevertheless responding. And what are they doing? So the tools that they have include flagging content. They include content management, and they include accounts suspensions. So this is subject to further exploration, but it's a very important topic. And as we know, hate speech has been spiking on social media. And so they have a responsibility to lead on this as well. So coming now to our recommendations, we have two sets of kinds of recommendations: primary recommendations and secondary. You see here before you some of the key primary recommendations. So they include broadening the definition of hate speech to reflect the newer forms that have emerged beyond ethnicity and race. You see here that protective measures have to be put in place. So prohibiting all forms of hate speech, conforming to the Article 20 of the ICCPR. These are some of the measures that have to be taken. Vaguely worded laws have to be amended. Vaguely worded laws and orders must be amended again to take into account the newer forms of hate speech. In doing all of this, one cannot obviously outlaw hate speech outright. That has serious consequences for freedom of expression. So in taking action to counter hate speech, it's important to ensure that we adhere to the three-part test. That is, whatever measure we take has to be legal, has to be proportional, and it has to be necessary. In terms of our secondary recommendations, you see again a basket of 6 areas which we have made recommendations on: government agencies and mechanisms, ethnic racial policies, religious guidelines, language policy, LGBTI community, and integration activities. Now, let me say that collectively, what are we saying here? What are we offering? What are we recommending? We are saying that a review of all of these areas has to be undertaken to ensure that systematic institutionalized discrimination is rooted out. So it calls for a comprehensive review. A review of ethnic and racial policies, again, to eliminate any discrimination, intended or unintended. Religious guidelines must uphold freedom of religion or belief, as well as freedom of conscience, freedom of thought. That's fairly important. In terms of integration activities, these have traditionally been undertaken under the guise of security and harmony. But in undertaking these activities and in incorporating the newer forms of hate speech, we must approach these integration activities from the perspective of the individual rights, the rights of the individuals and groups, not so much from the national security and harmony perspective. So we must put the rights up front, to borrow a phrase. 2 or 3 other things, previous, yeah. 2 or 3 other things that we flag. One is the need for independent, neutral bodies to make assessments about what is hate speech, what is not hate speech, and so on. So we need such independent bodies. Related to that, we need a regional network of think tanks, human rights academies, and others to come together to tackle this issue in concert with the independent bodies, right? There needs to be more evidence-based research on this area. And finally, the last point I will mention here is national human rights institutions should place hate speech on their agendas. So coming now to the tech companies, our recommendations for the tech companies. Well, here the key point to note is that they have been not first responders, but somewhat late responders. They have reacted late. We know that hate speech has been spiking across social media platforms, but by the large companies that we know of. So they have to be more serious and more proactive in addressing the problem of hate speech. They have started to take measures, but clearly not enough. So they have to be more proactive. They have to adhere to their community standards. Some have approached the matter in a little bit of a cavalier manner, but now they are starting to take it more seriously. And they must deploy adequate resources. So some have started to do that. For example, deploying teams around the world, in one case, to detect hate speech, employing locals who speak the local vernacular to better understand and identify hate speech and so on. But clearly, this effort needs to be stepped up considerably. Right, so having outlined the key points of our report, the key points and the key recommendations, what will we do about it? We speak up for human rights. And so what will we do to speak up? Well, we've issued a press release. We will conduct media interviews. We will also do commentaries. So on that note, you will, if you do a Google search, you will find our op-ed in the Bangkok Post from last Saturday on hate speech. So please have a look at that. And we will do a variety of types of speaking engagements here and around the region. Last but not least, this report is part of an ongoing project that we have regarding hate speech in Asia. You see the title in front of you, Hate Speech in Asia, Challenges and Solutions. So this report is part and parcel of this project that will happen from 7 to 9 October. Now, Belen has told you already that we have about 11 partners. We do welcome expressions of interest for additional partners. Anyone who wish to join, please get in touch with us and be a part of the conference. Now, the conference, you may wonder, it's scheduled for 7 to 9 October. We are, of course, mindful of the current health situation, the pandemic, the COVID-19. We are following the travel advisories, and this is one of the reasons why we pushed back this conference from July this year to 7 to 9 October. We trust that we will be able to hold it then. In the event that we cannot, we may push it back to December. But right now it's 7 to 9 September. So to address the COVID situation, we also may adopt a blended approach, a face-to-face and an online portion. So that's, have a look at our site and please join us if you can. And finally, before we come to the social media actions, so a key point that I want to end on is that something I said earlier, as we tackle hate speech, we do have to be mindful of not restricting unduly freedom of expression. I think this is a very important point, and that's where the three-step test is so important. Right, so let me, having presented the report, turn the floor back to Belen.
Perfect, thank you, Robin, for taking us through the key points of the report and into the recommendations. And for all of you listening who would want to read the report, you can find it on the website after the webinar. and we will also obviously post about it on our social media. And again, if you have questions, in the meantime, you can enter them in the Zoom chat box and we will discuss them. Then we will move on to our guests. And I would like to first ask Judy to start with her presentation. Thanks again for joining us, Judy.
Thank you, Belen, and thank you, everyone. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Asia Center for the launch of the report on hate speech in Southeast Asia, New Forms, Old Rules. And thank you for inviting Project Women and Girls Development of Brunei to be one of the discussants to this launch today. So just for some general remarks and reaction to the report after reading it, it is a timely report during the COVID-19 pandemic and highlighting the varying experience and challenges encountered in the region on hate speech as well as fake news going viral is very, very important. Although there is a need to emphasize in the report the inclusion of gender-based violence, as we are always advocating for women and girls, gender-based violence things, in the primary recommendation, in the broadening of the definition of new forms of hate speech that harass and discriminate vulnerable women and girls. The report's recommendation actually for the development of the National Plan of Action that seeks to protect all groups and individuals that are vulnerable to discrimination, regardless of citizenship status, is very, very important to explore further in the context of action against hate speech. For women and children, we already have existing convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, or the CEDAW, and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, or CRC, in safeguarding them from discrimination. However, a national plan of action that has been mentioned in the report, specifically on hate speech that perpetuates harassment on women and girls, will help strengthen existing safeguarding measures. The role of the business organizations in upholding human rights standards by rooting out hate speech along their value chain is also a very significant opportunity for the business organizations to include in their code of ethics and business principles the elimination of hate speech in all aspects of their business operations. And this report should also be disseminated to various chambers of commerce and industry and business councils in Southeast Asia. So on some of our broad comments on the hate speech or discriminatory remarks, action against women and girls, I would like to share some highlights on the recent study on VOW in ASEAN region during COVID-19, which was also submitted to the Special Rapporteur for Violence Against Women by Weaving Women's Voices, or WEAVE, a regional network of women and girl children where we are also a partner. And here, to maintain security and public order, governments created policies that criminalize the spread of fake news, online frauds on sales of health equipment, defamation against the president and state ministers, and those who criticize the government regarding the response to the pandemic. At a time of public health emergency, government utilized the military, police, and cybercrime units to arrest quarantine violators and monitor opinions in cyberspace. A case in point in the Philippines is the call for deportation by the government of an overseas Filipina caregiver in Taiwan for the crime on cyber libel intended to cause hatred amidst COVID-19 pandemic. She was later defended by the Taiwanese government. Looking at the national level here in Brunei, I would like to share also some developments that we have, wherein during the COVID-19 pandemic, it has always been emphasized by our government, the Public Order Act, Chapter 148, number 34, on the dissemination of false reports during COVID-19. The Public Order Act states that anyone who spreads false reports or makes false statements, whether orally or in writing, or by any other means that are likely to cause public alarm or result in public disorder, is guilty of an offense punishable by a prison term of 3 years or a fine of up to 3,000. So this has been repeatedly being announced in all social media platforms to reach as much as possible all the citizens and residents in Brunei to adhere to such act. Brunei has also a Jerusalem hotline, which was launched in 2018, and members of the public can report fake or malicious information circulated on social media. Authority for Info Communications Technology Industry of Brunei, or AITI, said that any unverified information which may be defamatory or can lead to breach of national security can be reported by the public. In a press statement by AITI, the move is supported by government ministries to encourage responsible social media usage and address spread of dubious or malicious material going viral online, and a call for a standard operating procedure to address the increasing prevalence of fake news on social media platforms was highlighted in the Legislative Council meeting sometime in 2018. Brunei has the highest social media penetration per capita despite of the very small population, and thus misleading information spread very quickly. Sometimes they call it the CNN syndrome in Brunei, wherein we get to know everything in a matter of minutes, because of very high penetration of social media. It has become imperative for the education of the public to learn how to identify and stop the spread of unverified fake news. During the COVID-19 pandemic in Brunei, there has a rise in sexual harassment experiences online, and work from home for women and online classrooms for children has made them vulnerable to sexual harassment on social media platforms. The online sexual harassment has contributed to an increase in mental health issues, and our organization has helped raise awareness among women and girls to report the perpetrators to relevant authorities for proper action. We have several government-run helplines in Brunei. The thing is, there is this observation of the behavior of the people wherein they prefer to post on social media situations of sexual harassment that happens to them. There seems to be some sense of embarrassment to properly inform the authorities about it or lodge a report about it. And we encourage those who are victims of such to formally report so that the perpetrators can be properly brought into court. Yeah. So in conclusion, when hate speech or language is used to harass women and girls, it can take a toll on their mental health, specifically during a pandemic when mobility is limited, jobs are lost, source of income is fast depleting, and the future is unknown. Violence against women and girls have socioeconomic impacts and effects that last a lifetime, considering that these violence and the victim's trauma and mental health are not directly addressed. And in some countries, there are reports that these are less prioritized during crisis. It not only affects the victims, but the society in general. The recommendations of the report on hate speech in Southeast Asia to create legislative measures to address discrimination or respond to incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence, and policies that address hate speech of all forms also resonates well with the recommendation of WEAVE and supported by Project Women and Girls Development that there is a need to amplify the development of policies that take into consideration the experiences and contexts of women and girls to prevent and eliminate discrimination. So gender stereotyping and violence against women and girls in Southeast Asia. So far, that's all that I can give my thoughts on this very timely report that Asia Center has launched. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you so much, Judy, for your view on this and for your observations in Brunei and obviously also your observations related to your own organization. Very interesting. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Good. So then we will continue to Rowan Reed, who's the Asia Programs Manager for Internews. So it's floor is yours to share your thoughts on the report. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Belen. And look, I'd like to start up by commending the Asia Centre and the Time Media Fund for the report. I think as Judy just mentioned, it is extremely timely given what's going on with COVID-19. I suppose from my perspective, I would like to highlight some of the issues around freedom of expression that Robin brought up in his speech. There's a very blurred line between promoting free speech and at the same time limiting hate speech. Language is not binary. There are references, inferences and references that are often very much localized, which influence the meaning of words and phrases. And this is obviously compounded by translation and culture and history. So when Robin was talking about, and the report talks about the role of social media companies, it is really difficult for them to understand those nuances and respond to those nuances appropriately. Overall, society at the moment, and probably always, is on, we're on a journey of cultural change, and that will lead to shifts in what is acceptable and what is not. Globalization has really pushed that on a lot faster. We're seeing changing recognition of cultural identity, personal identity, and what it means to be an individual, and the rights that you have to share that within your community, and what you expect from your community as well. So we have to be careful to be tolerant and understanding of that changing environment. And going back to COVID-19, Judy mentioned some of the responses that governments have taken to COVID-19. They are designed to limit the amount of misinformation, disinformation, or outright fake news being spread around the virus, but they are also being used as a smokescreen to allow greater racism, greater xenophobia, restricting certain people's engagement in conversation, and to the point where in Cambodia, a 14-year-old girl was arrested and charged under the new laws because she posted on her Facebook that she was concerned that girls in her class had COVID-19. There was clearly no active intent there by this girl to marginalize or cause problems, but that is how the law can be applied. So, but more broadly, I think leaders and governments need to listen. They need to be proactive, and they need to be very adaptive. Governments have a role in protecting against hate speech, but generally speaking, they're slow to act and often use brute force rather than a nuanced, finely calibrated approach. Most ASEAN governments already have pretty questionable records when it comes to free speech, and many recently have either introduced or are considering introducing fake news laws. I think, and Robin pointed to a few of those which are mentioned in the report. These laws go well beyond their stated purpose, and they limit political criticism and deny other human rights. So civil society has a critical role here in two ways. One, it needs to work with government to ensure that the new laws or changes to existing laws are suitably narrow to focus and address just hate speech, and that they cannot be manipulated to serve other less democratic means. Also, civil society has a role to take other measures to build tolerance and harmony in society outside the activities of government. And I think we can talk about push forces and pull forces. I think some of the efforts that civil society are doing will reduce hate speech much more effectively than introducing new laws. And the other point that's been raised, and I think it's a really, really valid point, and that's the rise of social media. Social media has empowered the sense of self-identity, and I think that's a great thing, but that comes at a cost. There is a growing unwillingness to accept alternative point of views. Social media bubbles reinforce stereotypes, which creates barriers to pluralism, and ultimately that leads to a rise in hate speech. And so in order for the tech companies they have a responsibility here, but if they are to take a greater role in managing hate speech, then we as society need to come up with a really bulletproof definition of what hate speech is and really be able to hold those tech companies accountable to it. I'll just briefly touch on traditional media. They have been part of this shift in my view towards growing hate speech, this spike that was referred to in the poll. They're becoming far more partisan, far more opinion driven and compliant to target audiences. I think the idea, I would like to see media become far more generalistic in their approach, and rather than focus on niche audiences, take a broader view. Unfortunately, that's unlikely to happen, mainly because of social media. The profitability of traditional media is declining significantly. But that is a role that governments can therefore play in the way they regulate their media. I think I'll probably leave it at that. But it's a great report, and there's a lot in it that we can use collectively to strengthen the way we approach hate speech.
Thank you so much, Rowan, for your thoughts on the report. And I think, I mean, you mentioned it in the beginning, like the blurred line between, you know, where do you control hate speech and where does it also touch on the freedom of speech? That is, I think, a very difficult blurred line and important to discuss. So thank you for your thoughts on that.
You're welcome.
Good. So we will now continue to Nukila. Yeah, we are pulling up her slides as we speak, and
okay.
We already got some questions in the Zoom chat box. So again, a reminder for everyone that you can obviously enter your questions there, and we will discuss them after the presentations. Good. So the floor is yours, Nukila.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, that's great. First of all, I would like to congratulate to Asia Center for issuing the hate speech report, because what has been stated in the report is to reflect on what is happening as well in Indonesia context. So I just want to elaborate on some link of the link between hate speech and the current situation of COVID-19 in Indonesia. There are numbers of cases of hate speech during the COVID-19 pandemic. Currently, on March 2020 to April 2020, police received at least 443 reports from insulting the president and insulting the ministers, also targeted to some groups like Chinese minorities and religious minorities. I give an example of recent hate speech suspect because of insulting the president. One arrested for spreading hate speech against president. through the suspect's Facebook account. He wrote a statement like this: instead of doctor who died helping COVID-19 sufferers, it would be better if the president died, because it was easier to find a new president. Moreover, the president didn't do anything useful. So now he was in custody. So this is one of the example of hate speech, and mostly all the perpetrator use anonymous fake accounts, or frankly, they show in the content of social media like WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram or something like that. So how the government anticipate these issues? Because I read from the report regarding legal measures. So the government, all the perpetrator, subject to the ITE law, Information and Electronic Transaction, and Indonesia Criminal Code, or KUHP, we call it like that. And Indonesia ratified ICERD with law number 29, 1999, and law number 40, 2008 regarding the elimination of racial and ethnic discrimination. And also, police chief circular letter in 2015 defined about the on hate speech, yeah. So this is and in that circular letter, the national police said hate speech is the form of insult, defamation, unpleasant act, provoking, inciting, and spreading false news. It's stated like that. So I would like to highlight one issue regarding one interesting cases in the Indonesia Constitutional Court, or Mahkamah Konstitusi, or MK, through the decision number 013 2016, revoked the legal articles on insulting the president and vice president in the criminal code KUHP. The court considers legal articles on that criminal codes could lead to legal uncertainty, because its interpretation was very vulnerable to manipulation. The revoked legal articles are then discussed again in the new draft criminal law, or KUHP, by now discussing in the parliament. Yeah. So I would like to I think this is the last slide, yeah. For this kind of remark or suggestion for this issue, I think it should be consolidated effort from prevention, like education, like a digital literacy, and then love spreading campaigns, and then should be like a more supervision, observation, yeah, with collaboration among the stakeholders regarding these issues. And then the enforcement, not only legal measures, but also the enforcement of some legal articles, because it found in some cases, particularly in the trial procedure, some of the judges or like prosecutor, they are missing the legal articles regarding hate speech, which already stipulated in ICERD, for instance. And then the last one, providing a mechanism of remedy, like compensation or restitution, yeah, regarding the remedy mechanism. I think I would like to end my my comments regarding the reports and my presentation. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nukila, for your comments and also for your suggestions on improvements. Good. So we got some questions in the meantime, and we would like to discuss one of them. And this is, first of all, specifically for, we would like to ask the question to Rowan, and it's really related to fake news. So the question is, when we're regulating fake news in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, who makes the decision whether the postings are fake or not? With very limited scientific findings, it's very difficult to make that decision. In Taiwan, for example, NGOs provide access to parallel information to social media users instead of finding fake news and give warnings.
I think that's a huge challenge. We've actually run programs looking at specifically for COVID-19. We've got a project that was designed to address fake news by monitoring and understanding it, that what was being, the rumors that were being spread, and then we do analysis of them and they're fact checked and things like that. But it's a slow process, especially with disinformation, misinformation. That goes out faster. It would take, you know, at best, let's say 2 days to address a rumor that's incorrect. By that stage, the rumor's gone and we're on to the next. So that's a huge challenge, and one that generally speaking, governments aren't particularly well suited to addressing.
Maybe Gaia could.
Yeah, so thanks, Rowan, for that answer. I think now is also a good time to move over to Gaia, because we also would like to ask you actually to also give your thoughts on this question. And maybe after that, you can discuss your project that you're currently working on.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for making this conversation possible. Because I think the first step towards addressing hate speech is to have more conversations about it, even before we think of laws and other things, because we're not really even talking about the problem in the room. But before I go into, and tell me if I'm speaking too fast and I can slow down. Before I go into the situation in South Asia, there is sort of a thematic problem that we might have to address. Because what are we talking about when you're talking about hate speech? That itself is sort of a big question mark. Now, I'm glad Bukila brought up that example of the person being arrested in Indonesia for saying he wished the president was dead. Now, that's not hate speech. You know, it could be many other things. But the international definition of hate speech is any form of expression that attacks or is discriminatory towards a person or a group because of who they are. And by who they are, it's not a question of whether you're the president or prime minister or the power you hold. Yeah. Actually, the who they are question is more about how little power you hold. It's about if you're being targeted for being of a particular sex, of particular sexual orientation, you're being from a particular religion or race, that's what matters. But what we are actually seeing across Asia, both in South Asia and in Southeast Asia, is that speech that is actually hate speech goes unaddressed, whereas legitimate expression, albeit it being distasteful, as was the example we looked at, is being increasingly branded as hate speech. Now, what we are doing is conflating hateful speech as hate speech, or hateful expression as hate expression. Now, this is not just from the state. I would say that this is the problem even with the legal community. Among lawyers, this is still a problem. Among civil society, this is still a particular problem, because civil society is also often branding these forms of expression that is problematic as hate speech those. Now, when it comes to South Asia, much of the problems that has been shared by my colleagues is also true for South Asia. But I'd like to focus on two countries, India and Bangladesh, to give you a bit of context. And I'm going to be talking about the intersection of the COVID situation, of an already existing hate. Sorry, can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay. An already existing hate speech environment, the evolved COVID situation, and how technology is playing into all of this. I'm going to try and look at this intersection of these three things. Now, why is technology particularly important in this time, especially around COVID, is because given the lockdown and the fear we have for physical spaces and physical meetings, a lot of our activities have moved online, whether it is working from home, looking for critical, even health information through online spaces, sharing and finding connections through online spaces. I think online spaces have almost become one of the only reliable ways under the current circumstances for us to have some form of human connectedness. Now, because of our over-reliance on or exclusive reliance on online spaces, especially in countries where there are severe lockdowns, like many countries in South Asia are in severe lockdown, then what happens is the hate speech that's there in the online space becomes even more real and suffocating, because we are already feeling isolated. And when hate is what we're constantly seeing, then you have no real way of having a community to respond with. But let's look at India as a specific example before we move to Bangladesh. Now, the COVID situation, or rather when India woke up to the COVID situation, it was already somewhere around March, though the COVID pandemic has been well talked about since January or even before that. Now, what happened was that by the time March came, India was already witnessing historic protests across the country, where people were protesting against the Citizenship Amendment Act, which was discriminatory towards Muslims and certain other religious communities, which the international community has unanimously opined that this Amendment Act was problematic. So there were huge protests happening. And as a result of it, the environment was already polarized as Hindu versus Muslim, majority versus minority community, progressive versus non-progressive. It was already sort of polarized. And it's no real secret that the entire COVID situation has been mismanaged by the state. The epidemic has been totally mismanaged by the state. So what is happening is that for the cyber armies of the government or the ruling dispensation has been constantly shifting the blame for the current situation around COVID on China, on how the provincial states are handling it, and on minorities. Now, Islamophobia is reached a height that we've never seen in India before, because already like I said, the Citizenship Amendment Act situation had already created the divide. Now, with the COVID pandemic also stepping in, we started seeing calls to isolate, segregate, boycott the entire Muslim community, to not accept goods being delivered from Muslims, not buy products from Muslims, sanctioning of force against Muslims, calling for, locking them up in one place, preventing them from coming in contact with non-Muslims. We started seeing the kind of discourse that we've never seen before. This is both online and offline. Now, what was really happening, what is particularly saddening though, is that, usually a crisis tends to bring people together. Like we saw that with tsunami, we saw that with many other instances. But it was really odd to see that this crisis further divided us. Now, let me particularly share with you an instance around a gathering that happened in India in February, March 2020. Now, this was a gathering of thousands of Muslims, around 3,500 or more Muslims, under the banner of Tablighi Jamaat that happened in New Delhi, which had participants from Malaysia, Indonesia, but across India. Now, what happened is some of the participants who had traveled from other countries to India for the event were carrying the virus. Now, that resulted in the virus spreading. Now, what was particularly shocking is that when the country already knew that, or the government already knew that a pandemic was, out, they allowed for this meeting to happen. And then once the situation got out of hand, what resulted was resurfacing of this discourse of calling Muslims as refugees, invaders, aliens, terrorists, kind of shifting the blame on Muslims for having spread the virus. Now, what is also particularly problematic is that there were many other gatherings, Hindu gatherings and other gatherings, which did not receive this kind of a response. It was only this Muslim gathering that received this kind of response. Now, what resulted from that is that in online spaces, hashtags like Corona Deal, Corona Jihad started trending. By Corona Deal, what they were trying to essentially convey is that China is fueling these Muslims to spread this kind of bioterrorism in India against the majority community, the so-called majority community. And Corona Jihad essentially, it draws its inspiration from the love jihad discourse we've had, where the people online were discussing about this situation as if Muslims were deliberately spreading the virus as a form of jihad, as a form of increasing the number of Muslims by bringing down the number of Hindus in the country through spreading the virus. Also, doctored videos were being spread on WhatsApp and other sources where they were showing Muslims, doctored videos showing Muslims spitting on things, spitting on the floor. This was also happening during the Ramzan period, yeah. So there was also a lot of problems around that, saying that they were spitting on relief materials and they were purposefully touching people, leaving things that they have touched in different places so people will touch it. So, there was really problematic content like this that was being spread. But what they were basically doing is depicting Muslims as the virus, as the virus itself. So there were many memes that showed Muslims as virus. And Muslims were being equated with bioterrorists, and the weapon that they were being shown as carrying is the Chinese virus. So there's also racism that comes in. And then false claims that Muslims were being tested positive for COVID at a much higher rate than non-Muslims. Other things like, Muslims are trying to spread this to non-Muslims, and open calls to boycott Muslim businesses. You would see there was a member of the ruling government, an MLA of the ruling government, who put out a video saying Hindu vendors will have a saffron flag, only buy from Hindu vendors. Do not allow Muslim cooks to cook food for you anymore. Don't allow Muslim domestic workers to come into your house. These were things that were being openly said online. Now, you also know that this is a problem in Myanmar. But what is interesting is in India, people started celebrating the Myanmar Buddhist monk, Asin, for calling for a genocide against Muslims. So you started seeing all of this. Now, what is really the issue here is that this was happening, and social media platforms knew this was happening because it was no big secret. It was trending. Corona Jihad, Corona deal was trending quite virally in India. They did nothing to stop it. And mainstream media stepped in to fuel this debate in such a terrible way that they made sure that this conversation was becoming extremely polarized. And not now, the question is whether the state did anything. Actually, the question is not whether the state did anything to mitigate it, because the state actually consciously contributed to this entire problem. Now, platforms like Facebook and Twitter did not respond at all. Messaging platforms like WhatsApp did nothing. Now, while they were, what is important to note here is that these platforms were willing to do, or rather engage with health-related misinformation around COVID, but they were not as willing to deal with the hate speech aspect of it. And my personal assessment is the reason why they did that, or they don't do that, I continue to not do that in a satisfactory way, is because hate speech brings them monetary benefit. It's almost a deliberate act, according to me, because these platforms make a lot of money out of hate because of the virality of it and the engagement in it. So why we've talked a lot about how states are responding to hate speech, but to be quite honest and blunt, that's actually a secondary question. The first question that we need to actually even answer is about the active role of states in promoting hate speech. It's no secret that most governments have cyber armies that actively promote hate. Now, let me quickly just, I might be out of time, but let me quickly just talk about Bangladesh before we wrap up. Now, as far as Bangladesh goes, we've seen that in the last few months, dozens of bloggers have been arrested, activists have been arrested for putting out messages saying they're not happy about how the government is dealing with COVID-19. Similarly, journalists have been arrested, media has been threatened for saying that there might be issues of corruption in how relief material and testing materials are being procured. Now, all of this is being done under the Digital Security Act. Now, this might not be directly related to hate speech, but there is a connection, because the bloggers who are being arrested are also bloggers who identify as being atheists. Now, that really is problematic, because they're bringing in that irreligiosity into the so-called irreligiosity into the conversation. Because what you're seeing is that around COVID, many religious leaders have stepped up providing solutions to COVID. For instance, in India, for a long time, it was being promised that if you drink cow urine, you're going to be cured of COVID. There were clerics in Pakistan who were saying that corona can only affect you during the day. And then in India, the Prime Minister was asking people to bang plates, which ultimately resulted in other religious heads claiming that the banging of the plates will create sound vibrations that will scare corona away. Now, all of this is also being done under the banner of religion, which is, somehow capitalizing on the fear of the unknown of what COVID can do. So more and more people are looking to answers from anywhere. So even unscientific, untested responses like this are being passed on. Now, this is the context in which in Bangladesh it's happening. Now, what is really important is for us to face the fact that there's a normalization of hate, which is being complicitly done by the state, and this normalization is also being done by the entertainment and other forms of media. Particularly, Facebook and Twitter and Google have not responded to this, and they've not responded to this in any transparent way. And the problem is not that they don't understand hate speech. I completely disagree with anyone who says maybe the problem is they're not able to see what is hate speech or what's not hate speech. They have millions of dollars at their disposal, and they have enough technological backup to know what's hate speech and what's not. They are not doing it because it will result in political backlash, and it will result in monetary losses. And that's the fact of it. And also the problem of wanting to include more things as hate speech, I don't think that's actually the problem. The issue is taking the current standards and current the way we deal with hate speech in offline spaces and actually applying it seriously to online spaces, which we are not doing. So I think that's sort of the wrap up around South Asia and the issue.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gaia, for the elaborate comments on the report and for the examples. I think that's really important to obviously also discuss the examples of hate speech in the various countries. Good. We got some more questions in the meantime, so we will discuss those as much as possible. First of all, I have a question for Robin.
Okay.
Which is the following. How can the citizens trust the state to penalize disinformation, fake news, when discrimination is also state-sponsored and state-sanctioned?
Yes, well, thank you for the question from our audience. I think this is an important challenge, and it speaks to what all of you, especially Gaia and Rowan, you were mentioning this. How can we trust the governments? And this speaks to our recommendation that you do need independent agencies, independent and neutral agencies. And I link up here with what I think Rowan was saying about the importance of civil society in being part of this conversation and in shaping the responses. I can only give you an imperfect answer in the sense that we face a very almost tragic situation today where the mainstream media that we have come to trust is being targeted by state actors. And so that further erodes any kind of trust in both the media, but also in the government. And we know very well where that problem is happening. It's pretty much all over and more prominent in some cases. So as I said, how can citizens trust? Again, coming back to neutral, independent agencies, the role of civil society. And of course, we also have to do a good job of, for example, media literacy, education about media literacy, and how to critically analyze the news and so on. So I'll leave it there and we can talk some more about it.
Thank you, Robin. So we have another question, which I will refer to Judy and to Nukila. And that is, what core principles should guide how social media companies should moderate hate speech? Should it take into consideration what would be considered hate speech within the country's context, or base it on core principles, bearing in mind that a common definition does not exist? Judy, maybe first over to you to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, thanks, Belen, for that. I think when you talk about effective communication, it's communicating the facts, right? Because we need to be transparent with all the facts that we would like to disseminate to all constituents that we have. So I think I will stick out with the proposal that we need to always be factual in all the things that we put out in the public to consume. And I'd like to share how Brunei has been successful in containing the community spread of COVID-19. We have not had any positive cases since May 9, 2020. So still our borders are in lockdown, but inside the community in Brunei, we are more or less quite free to move around. The use of social media by the government, using Telegram as a way of disseminating all information from different ministries, has been very successful. We had been using all sorts of channels where government feed us with updates, factual, transparent updates on the status of COVID-19 in the country. And that helped a lot in terms of maintaining peace and order in the country. And I'm very proud of that. That is an accomplishment that all the people in Brunei are supportive of, alhamdulillah. And again, for social media companies, Brunei has been a very high user of Instagram, actually, over than Facebook. And Instagram uses a lot of photos, not much of a lot of writing and discussions there. But then again, social media companies should be able to act fast, as what Gaia and Rowan has mentioned, that there's no really definite definition of what hate speech is. Then again, the report is really very timely in terms of expanding the definition in the new world, the new normal that we have now, what exactly hate speech means in the context of each individual countries. So then again, I'll go back again to sticking always to the facts, being transparent and ethical. That is also a very wide debate. If we talk about what is ethical to you may not be ethical to another constituent. So again, we go back again to all these principles of integrity, non-discrimination, ethical ways of doing things, and all these universal principles that we have. Yes, so basically that's what my thoughts at the moment on that. Yeah.
Thanks, Judy. That's clear. Thank you so much for that answer. Then Nukila, we would like to also ask you that question. So really on what core principles should guide how social media companies moderate hate speech?
Yeah, I think it is the power of socialization, the awareness about this issue as well, about factual issues of the hate speech amongst the community, to the targeted groups, for women's, for the ethnic minorities, religious minorities. It should be raised, about how to have more and more conversation about hate speech, the factual hate speech in the community. I think the other things about how for the younger generation, I'm really concerned about the younger generation, because this is the role of the media the media like WhatsApp company, Facebook, Instagram, to educate about this issue as well. Also, how to internalize some rules. Yeah, this so many rules regarding hate speech elements, and how the company knows about this issue as well. How to internalize it, and then put into their platform of these rules. I think these three issues that I would like to raise about the question.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nukila. Okay, good. Then we have another question. It's quite a long one, so bear with me while I'm reading the question. I will ask this to James. In the Philippines, Maria Ressa de Rappler was recently convicted for cyber libel over an article that was written before the anti-cybercrime law has taken effect. Rappler has been writing articles and reports critical of the government. Even ordinary citizens who are simply voicing out their concerns and are airing their grievances are being apprehended. Recently, a new law, the anti-terror law, in the Philippines just took effect, which vaguely defines terrorism where dissent and opposition would be considered as one, further clamping down on the freedoms of people. With this, I would like to ask you your insights on how we can combat hate speech while ensuring that freedom and rights of the people are upheld when the state has been weaponizing the law to silence dissent and using its resources to slam critics.
Yeah, that's indeed a long question, best answered with a short response, I guess. I think Philippines has a very vibrant media environment. And I think what's happening in the Philippines, can also inform us about, what's happening in the media landscape elsewhere in Southeast Asia and beyond. The pattern we see is as long as the news outlets and the journalists report on kind of informational news, non-critical informational news, then they are very much left alone. Now, whether they survive financially or not, that's a different matter, but they are. But the ones the news outlets and journalists critically examine political leaders, their policy, and in current times, their management of COVID-19, then they become under attack. And what's happened in the Philippines, both with the Rappler and ABS-CBN, is also that one, they go for the journalists, especially the high-profile journalists or editors, and they try to sort of place sanctions on them and get them out of the game, or they go for the media outlets themselves, denying them licenses, as we saw, or preventing funds going to advertising, revenue, and also scaring off investors. So you see that happening in the Philippines, but we can also see a similar issue now, befalling Al Jazeera in Malaysia, where the Malaysian government is after them for airing this documentary report on the plight of migrant workers in Malaysia. So you see a pattern that's emerging, and alternative news portals around the region also are suffering the same fate. But added on to that, and perhaps the one thing that has been sort of coming out here and there throughout this afternoon is really the role of governments, whether it's hate speech, or just other forms of articulation. We need to understand that historically in Southeast Asia, governments speak, and the kind of hate they have put into it has led to genocide and has led to crimes against humanity and mass killings. Whether it's the Indonesian 1965 experience, whether Cambodia, Khmer Rouge, the Rohingya in Myanmar, the secessionist movement, identity politics in southern Thailand or Mindanao, Philippines, you find a lot of it is fueled by government speak. And hence, I think government, should not, in many cases, we tend to articulate or call on them to be the arbiters of hate speech, hate crime, discrimination, so on. But I think we cannot trust them. So because they are, to many instances and our historical record, responsible for it, whether it's the key political leaders right at the top, supplementary and middle-level government leaders, or government officials and bureaucrats. They spew a lot of negativity, which is amplified in the body politic and society, and it's going viral online. So therefore, I think we need a matrix of stakeholders that includes government, of course, but also civil society, international organizations, and also technology company, in order to have conversations and come up with solutioning in terms of how we deal with this issue.
Thank you, James, for your comments on that. I think we still have a couple of minutes for a couple of questions. Shall we? Yeah.
And I see a poll has come up on the point.
Perfect. Yeah, we can also post a poll. Yeah, we have another poll that we would post. We would like to post to you. See it already online. The question: should governments be the only ones responsible for combating hate speech? Obviously, we have discussed it a little bit already in the webinar, so good to have your thoughts on that. Maybe in the meantime, we can ask one more question. You are answering that. And that is a question I would like to ask to Judy. And that is about what groups of people have been especially affected for this hate speech online and offline during COVID-19. What trends do you see in Southeast Asia, but specifically, I think in Brunei, related to COVID-19?
Specifically, since we work with women and girls, they became more invisible during the lockdown, during the prolonged stay at home, and they have only their gadgets at home, wherein they log on to the internet to do their work for women, and children log onto the internet to do their work on their classroom homeworks and assignments. And they also use social media. More hours are spent on social media during that time. So the experiences that they encounter specifically on sexual harassment has really increased. And that has been something that was alarming to the society, because we are unnecessarily exposing children to such harmful effect on their mental health. So this is the trend that we really had gathered some data, and we also raised that concern to relevant authorities and made an awareness campaign on that one, through our webinars. So that is an area that we have really observed during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, understood. Thank you, Judy.
Welcome.
Time for one last question, and this is actually for Gaia, also related to the social media companies. So the question is, in order to avoid political clash, social media companies are not responding to hate speech happening on their platforms. How should those companies from the private sector and governments work alongside to sanction perpetrators of hate speech and avoid political tensions at the same time?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because you see, I think there is a small shift. While a lot of my intervention might have seemed negative, but there are some shifts that are happening. Now you see the shift in the US, for instance, where Facebook is waking up and saying, okay, we want to do more about hate that's being spread online. The best way for the government and private sector to work together is, first of all, for private sector to have a serious thought about self-regulation. Because I think we can't escape the time when platforms are going to be regulated by the government. So the first thing for platforms to do is to come up with a much more serious community standards. More importantly, how they're going to use the community standards. There is no transparency of who is moderating, what is the basis on which they're moderating, why a particular content was taken down or not decided not to be taken down. All of this needs to be, this information needs to be made public. And the government and say private platform partnership comes next. Now the government and platform partnership needs to come in a way where ads are involved, for instance, revenue is involved, for instance, for these private platforms to be accountable for where this money is coming from and how this money is being channeled. So that's number two. But the most important way in which government and private sector can collaborate is by understanding the legal standards at the national level. So there needs to be much more evolution of jurisprudence on hate speech, on what intermediary liability is. But I think in this partnership between the state and the private sector, the civil society is very important. Civil society needs to be in on that conversation, has to be in on those negotiations. But unfortunately, to be very fair, open about it, is that civil society doesn't have the resources like Facebook. Because Facebook is much more comfortable directly calling the minister than holding a public consultation to talk about a problem, right? Because that will create a problem with the ministry. So we need more resources to be placed in the hands of civil society so that civil society can hold a meeting and call the ministry and Facebook to come to it. So there needs to be a shift in the power. No, that's something that the project that I work on does, the Challenge project. You can look it up, Challenge APC, and we make available resources for it. We also make available different kinds of, not just monetary resources, and different kind of guides on how to go about platform accountability. So that's perhaps one of the ways we could do it.
Understood. Thank you so much, Kaya, for your thoughts on that. Good. So I think we're coming to an end. James, any last comments from your side before we finalize? James, do you hear us?
Yes, nothing further. I think I've made my comments about the role of governments. So, just not to give them a blank check, so to speak.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Then I think we can conclude. Thank you all for participating, and a special, obviously, shout out to our guests who have participated. Oh, and we have the poll, not to forget. So there is a majority for obviously the no answer, which is good. I think, and this is obviously also the main sort of message from us and also from the speakers, that it's not only the role of the government to tackle this issue. 97%, so that's obviously a lot. Good. Yeah. Again, thank you so much for participating. The report is out. You can download it on the website, and we will also post it on our social media. So obviously, take a look in that and read our report. And then I think we are good to finalize. Good. Thank you so much. And we are closing the call. Thank you so much, and see you at the next webinar.